You've probably heard the history of Hanukkah and how the Maccabees fought bravely against Antiochus IV's large armies. Right now, let me invite you to imagine the scene that provoked the war in the first place. Antiochus IV ascends the steps of the temple in Jerusalem. He has conquered the nation of Israel and wants to destroy the Jewish people by eradicating Judaism. The king enters the temple, declares himself to be God manifest on earth, and then sacrifices a pig upon the holy altar. He follows up this abominable act by requiring every Jewish person to present copies of the Jewish Bible for burning. If you are thinking that this describes the Antichrist, you're only partially correct. Antiochus IV was a pagan king who conquered Israel in the 2nd century BCE. He declared himself Epiphanes, which means God manifest. He desecrated the temple in Jerusalem and used his full political force to obliterate the Jewishness of the Jewish people. However, none of this took God by surprise. The prophet Daniel foretold this event hundreds of years before. Daniel 11, verse 31 speaks of a coming king who would set up an abomination of desolation in the temple and would do blasphemous things, and most scholars agree that this is a reference to Antiochus. The Jewish authors of 1st Maccabees also believed that Antiochus's actions in the temple were the abomination of desolation, 1 Maccabees 1:54. This act of sacrilege left the temple defiled. After God empowered the Maccabees and the Jewish people to defeat Antiochus, they purified the temple and decided to have a new celebration to remember the temple's restoration. This event marked the first Hanukkah, or the Feast of Dedication, as it is called in John 10:22. Going back to the book of Daniel, many of the prophecies in chapters 11 and 12 were not accomplished during the reign of Antiochus, not least of all the tribulation and the resurrection of the dead. In addition, there are several other references in Daniel that refer to the abomination of desolation, without a clear picture of how they match up. You can look at Daniel 9:27, 12:11, and 8:13 to see what I'm talking about. How can all of this refer to Antiochus? Jesus leads the common Jewish understanding of Daniel in a whole new direction. He refers to the abomination of desolation several times, as written in Matthew 24:15, Mark 13:14, and Luke 21:20. But he always speaks of it in the future tense. Instead of referring the phrase back to Antiochus, Jesus has his listeners look ahead. One day, a king even greater and even worse than Antiochus will stand in the temple of God. He will be the Antichrist. Jesus does not deny that Daniel 11:31 refers to Antiochus. Rather, for Jesus, Antiochus is merely a foreshadowing or a type of the greatest enemy of God's people. As we look at current world events, we see that Israel is truly surrounded by her enemies. While we don't yet know who this end-time Antichrist is, we can understand Jesus' words from a spiritual standpoint. The greatest enemy of God's people is not flesh and blood, but the ruler of darkness. Yet this should not be a cause for despair, especially during the Hanukkah season. The sovereign hand of God enabled the Jewish people to rise and defeat Antiochus, and we celebrate Hanukkah today because of it. And God's hand is still on Israel to empower her to defeat her enemies, who are now in the form of radical terrorists in the Middle East. The fact that Jewish people and Israel still exist and are living out Jewish identity is a testimony of God's faithfulness. Think about it. Thousands of years later, we are still celebrating Hanukkah. How much more will we celebrate when God brings his great and awesome deliverance from the Antichrist through his Messiah? That battle will be over before it begins. If Antiochus is merely a foreshadowing of the Antichrist, then the joy of Hanukkah is a foreshadowing of Jesus returning and bringing the full deliverance of his kingdom. When we think of Hanukkah, we think of the lighting of the menorah or the lampstand. As believers in Jesus, we believe that he is the true light of the world, greater than any light on a lampstand in a physical temple. Both John the disciple and John the Baptist pointed to the true light who enlightens all who believe. In him was life, and the life was the light of men. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness did not comprehend it. There came a man sent from God, whose name was John. He came as a witness to testify about the light, so that all might believe through him. He was not the light, but he came to testify about the light. There was the true light, which, coming into the world, enlightens every man. John chapter 1, verses 4 through 9. Scripture teaches us that Jesus is the incarnate Word, God in the flesh, who is the ultimate light of God and reflects the glory which once rested upon the mercy seat in the temple. Furthermore, Jesus let his disciples know that he is the light of the world. Then Jesus again spoke to them, saying, I am the light of the world. He who follows me will not walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. John chapter 8, verse 12. And this is the good news that we want to tell you this Hanukkah, that because of the true light of Messiah, we can have hope in this dark world. As his disciples, we are called to reflect his light, dispelling the darkness of our broken and sinful world. So as we celebrate this Hanukkah season, I hope you will remember to shine your light to all those around you, especially to your Jewish family and friends. Chag Sameach, Happy Hanukkah.